introduce today's speaker. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to recognize the President of the International Law Society. Melanie, thank you for doing this. This is her swan song. This is her last event that she's organized, and we're very grateful. Do you have successors?
There are successors.
Who are they?
Are they here today? Angela, yeah. Angela is president. And then there are some others.
Okay.
I'm Holland.
So you're tasked with continuing great programs such as with our distinguished speaker, Ambassador Laurence Pope, from whom we're now going to hear. Ambassador Pope is a retired Foreign Service officer. He lives in the neighborhood, by the way. You could walk to his house if you knew where it was. Very close. Over 30 years, he occupied posts across the Arab world, Tunisia, Bahrain, Morocco, Libya, and in the Department of State headquarters in Washington as director for Iran and Iraq, 1987 to 1990. He was associate director, subsequently, for counterterrorism. From 1993 to 1996, Ambassador Pope was the United States ambassador to Chad. From 1997 to 2000, he was a political advisor to General Anthony Zinni at the United States Central Command and was awarded the Secretary of Defense Medal for Distinguished Civilian Service. After the Senate Foreign Relations Committee declined to take up his nomination by President Clinton as ambassador to Kuwait, in October 2000, he retired from the State Department. But retirement did not last very long. In 2001, he was staff director for an international committee investigating the origins of the Palestinian uprising in the West Bank. He returned to active duty after the death of Ambassador Chris Stevens in Benghazi on September 11, 2012, to take charge of our embassy in Tripoli. He's been a consultant to the Defense Department, the intelligence community, and DARPA, which he can tell you about. It's very interesting. In 2014, he published a book called The Demilitarization of American Diplomacy. He has other books. As I said, he lives in Portland, Maine. He's a graduate of Bowdoin College. Larry?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. It really is this morning. And I know this is the end of term and the beginning of a reading period, and you will have a lot of things to be thinking about. So I'm grateful for your having come today, and will do my best not to put you to sleep. We've got a small enough group in this place so that I'll talk for a while, but then I hope we can get a dialogue going about the things that I have said, and that you will have some comments and objections. Let me begin with a small apology. The title here, Drones, Drones, Cyberwar, Special Forces, and Other Extraterritorials. It's kind of come on. I will be talking a little bit about some of those things, but I took it from the chapter in the book that Professor Northey mentioned about American foreign policy, the demilitarization thereof, and it's a monograph which is one of the most widely unread monographs in the history of academic publishing, which is saying something. Let's see. I should also begin with the traditional disclaimer that nothing in what I am going to say should be construed as legal advice or guidance in free passes. That's what the lawyers in my case always put in the bottom of their emails, and that's what you'll have to do on that. So, I want to not lecture so much as to provoke a discussion, and so I'm going to try to be a little bit outrageous in some of the things that I say, and I hope that you'll pick me up on that during the discussion period. I want to pose some basic questions about the United States and its purposes in the world, and so I'll touch on our national security institutions and the ways they've changed in this age of globalization and existing tense. The Prussian writer on war, Karl von Clausewitz. Anybody know Clausewitz? Anybody read On War? Good book about war. The best book about war probably ever written. It was written in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. It never surpassed. Wrote that the first question that a statesman should ask in thinking about war was, what kind of war is it? Is it a limited war of choice? Is it a guerrilla conflict where a state comes to defeat a sort of an actor within its own territory? Is it an international conflict which is existential in nature? Because the answer to that question is going to depend on the answer to that question depends how you fight it, right? What kind of war it is, or something in between. And so the question I want to begin with, in thinking about American foreign policy, is what kind of world is it? What kind of world is it? And what am I meaning by that? Most of you, though not all of you, are too young to remember the heady days of the last century, the 1990s. Seems like ancient history to most of you, I'm sure. After the Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall came down. It was a particularly euphoric time. History, in the Hegelian sense of the working out of an idea in the world, right, seemed to have come to a triumphant end. That end being the liberal internationalist idea of free markets and democratic institutions based on the rule of law. And we had people, we spent billions of dollars during the 1990s. We being the United States, and I'm afraid it's the habit of an old warhorse to, when I say we, to mean the United States. We spent billions during that decade trying to democratize the former Soviet Union, Russia. We sent delegations from Portland, Maine, lawyers from Portland, Maine, went to Russia to sort of proselytize about the rule of law. And this was replicated all over the country and with many, many fine institutions. Western elites saw the world as flattening out under the impact of globalization, the information revolution. And its sharp relief of historical antagonism was going to be consigned to the ash heap of history. China's rapid economic development would transform that country inevitably, and that would, in time, lead to political liberalization there too. The Europeans were deeply engaged in forging a more perfect European Union. New international doctrines emerged too, legal documents, doctrines. But if I say the words R2P, what does that mean to you all? Anybody here? R2P, what's R2P? R2P stands for responsibility to protect. It's an emerging doctrine in the UN around 2000, the early 2000s. And the notion was that national sovereignty and borders were not inviolate at all, but that there was a duty of states to intervene in another state's territory in cases of genocide and, or crimes against humanity. An international criminal court was established in The Hague with the mission of prosecuting war crimes. One thing was clear, or seemed to be in that period, at the end of the Cold War, and that is that the notion, which dates back to the 17th century, political scientists talk about post-Westphalia states, referring to 1648 and sort of the modern notion of the nation-state took shape, right? They seem to be sort of on the way out. They seem to be the way of the past. Now, a world which is composed of 192, at last count on the United Nations, that's about what we have, I think, juridically equal entities, from Vanuatu to the United States, all with, the responsibility to, the same international responsibilities, the same juridical status, may seem to be a bit of a nonsense if you think about it much. But that was the world that is the world that we live in. And to the extent that the implications of globalization were being sort of, in a way, we were coming to terms with the implications of globalization, there was a real sense that nation state was kind of the wave of the past, right? The information revolution, flows of capital, all of that transformed the world. Nationalism was the past. Networks for the future. There's a guy, anybody know who Peter Thiel is? Peter Thiel? He's Thiel probably. He was a great supporter of the person who was elected president of our venerable republic last November, supporter, and a venture capitalist, perhaps one of the leading venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. And Peter Thiel had an idea, which he still has, I think, although it's been amended a little bit, and it has to do with seasteading. So the idea of seasteading, it's the analogy is with the homesteading movement of the 19th century in the United States, is that these states are inefficient, hierarchical, paper hierarchies, hopelessly, they're going to be disrupted by the information revolution. They need to be disrupted because the dead hand of the state is really an impediment to innovation. And Silicon Valley had the idea, and Thiel had the idea, and still has, of creating entities outside of states, offshore islands. There's actually, I looked it up on the internet this morning, and there's going to be a conference in French Polynesia about seasteading. The government in France isn't terribly happy about it, I think. But, and the notion is that we'll set up these sort of, in international waters, right, outside the 12-mile zone, which of international waters, and we'll build artificial islands, and they won't be under control of any particular state, and we'll be free to innovate, we'll be free to do whatever we need to do in order to create a more perfect world. Even the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which followed the end of the Cold War, scarcely interrupted this triumphant narrative of globalization. The New York Times writer on international affairs, Tom Friedman, argued that realists and out-of-work cold warriors, he's looking at me, who insisted that the never-ending struggle between nation-states was the immutable defining feature of international affairs, were professionally and psychologically threatened, I take that a little personally, by the idea that globalization and economic integration might actually influence geopolitics in some very new and fundamental ways. Social networks, it was argued, would give new power to individuals to threaten the mighty Leviathan state, pause, which had so long bestrode the world. The narrative, this globalization narrative, continued into the first decade of the century with the various so-called color revolutions, green in Lebanon, rose in Georgia, orange in Ukraine, followed, of course, by the Arab Spring, when a young Google engineer helped to mobilize protests in Cairo's Liberation Square, which led to the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak. Inside Hillary Clinton's State Department, her planning director was a Princeton professor named Anne-Marie Slaughter. Name of somebody anybody knows? Anne-Marie Slaughter? Anyway, her principal work has been on the work-life balance for women, but she argued that henceforth, in a seminal article for Foreign Affairs called America's Edge, she argued that henceforth, networks operating above and below the state, so not through the state, not government, apparatus, would be the new dominant force in international affairs. She also suggested conveniently that for the United States that we would not lose any power because of this. Other states might decline, but not the United States because we had what she called a networking edge. We were better at networking than everybody else. Professor Slaughter in the policy planning slot at the State Department, which used to be occupied by George Kennan, presided over a 22-month-long reform project for American diplomacy, of which you have never heard, for good reason. As the Arabs say, the mountain went into labor and brought forth a mouse. The modest bureaucratic reforms which resulted from this 22-month-long project soon faded away as his successor, John Kerry, took office. And with this globalization narrative and the decline of nation states, our foreign ministry, the State Department, and its diplomatic service, which is premised on a world of states, right? Diplomacy, it's a peculiar term that it arises about 1800, but it is roughly coterminous with these post-Westphalia states, post-1648 post-Westphalia states, these nation states. Without nation states, no diplomacy. Embassies become increasingly irrelevant. If you can operate in networks above and below the states, you don't need embassies to sort of operate between states. So it was a peculiar idea for the State Department, our foreign ministry, to espouse, but it did. And meanwhile, while the State Department was occupied with this internal reform, power had moved within the Beltway to the Defense Department, to a lesser extent to the intelligence agencies, and the professional military services, and the White House staff, especially under President Obama. The State Department was seen as an ineffective handmaid to a militarized foreign policy. That's what I wrote that little book about a couple of years ago. The efforts of the State Department's Foreign Service to take up the burden of empire as a sort of colonial service in Iraq and Afghanistan were not a particular success. But they did consume a great deal of the State Department's talent and personnel. There were only about 8,000 or 9,000 foreign service officers, and many of those were sent to Iraq and Afghanistan to sort of try to pacify the natives. Well, all of that has come to an abrupt end, right? Brexit, right? And especially the age of Trump. This globalization narrative is interrupted by a sharp sort of discontinuity, much to our surprise. On April 6th, just a little while ago, our naval forces in the Mediterranean fired 59 cruise missiles at a Syrian air base in retaliation for Syrian government use of sarin, a chemical weapon, against innocent civilians. That this was an abhorrent act is clear, and it's just as clear that the 2001 authorization to use military force, on which rests the legal basis for our war against extremism, our continuing sort of struggle against Al-Qaeda and its offshoots, does not cover an attack on Syria, the Syrian government. But the Trump administration simply cited the national security interest of the United States and left it at that, without even trying to cobble together a legal rationale, much less to take a glance back at the elaborate memorandum that the outgoing Obama administration had put together, which had been prepared as a legacy, I suppose, for Hillary Clinton when she took over, entitled The Legal and Policy Frameworks Guiding the United States Use of Military Force and Related National Security Operations. If you're interested in it, and that sort of thing, I would suggest that you take a look at that. It's a 60-page thing. It's got 200 footnotes. I didn't read every bit of it when I did. And so it remains the case in the age of Trump that 15 years after 9/11, we remain in a permanent state of war in with no end in sight. The targets of our military might are a motley bunch of Arab and other Muslim extremists, dislocated by globalization, ill at ease in the modern world, in places from Afghanistan to Somalia to Syria, including Houthi rebels in Yemen, where for some reason we're playing a supporting role in Saudi Arabia. Our Secretary of Defense is in Saudi Arabia as I speak, talking about the need for a peace conference in Yemen. I think he's uncomfortable with this role that we're playing in Yemen. And inside the Beltway, the militarization that I wrote about a couple of years ago has really accelerated dramatically. An active duty general heads the national security staff at the White House. Major Master, a retired general, Jim Mattis heads the Defense Department. Another Marine general heads the Department of Homeland Security. I think highly of both of those guys, whom I know a bit. But they would be the first to argue that strong civilian leadership is needed at the State Department too, as part of what are conventionally known as the instruments of national power. Instead, what we have as a substitute is armed drones, cruise missiles, and special forces deployed around the world. They've become the principal instruments of our diplomacy. Carry battle groups too in their movement, if we could keep track of where they were going and not misconstrue the direction in which they were scheming. Our defense budget, just to recall some basic numbers, is about 10 times that of Russia, 4 times that of China, which are the states which were the closest things we have to what in Pentagonese are known as peer competitors. Peers, competitors, not quite peers. And our intelligence budget has roughly doubled too since 9/11. But our foreign ministry, the State Department, already marginalized under President Obama, is so far at least an irrelevant appendage in the Trump administration. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has no professional staff to speak of. The unlovely building at Foggy Bottom is an empty shell. Does this matter? Well, as I suppose you imagine, I would argue that it does. Without a functioning foreign ministry, movement of policy and information from the outside world to our capital and back again is interrupted. It doesn't flow well. And we become a little bit like a blind pig looking for an acorn. Without ambassadors, we have no ambassadors in Seoul, South Korea, Beijing, China, Tokyo, Japan. Our embassies are a collection of people operating without a common purpose. You know, I'm talking about institutions here, and 2 institutions that I know well, our State Department and our Foreign Service and Diplomatic Service. Our press doesn't cover institutions well at all. Most journalists have had no experience of them from the inside. We'd rather keep a box score of who's up and who's down in the Beltway. It's easier to sort of keep score that way. But we're an anomaly among modern states in that respect. Everybody else takes its diplomatic service very, very seriously indeed. And I guess I would argue that the skill and competence of the Foreign Service officers who represent us around the world matter as much to the national security carrier battle group and perhaps more. And we started out with how much time we go into when?
We're going to
There's a class in here right after.
At 1 o'clock?
At 1:15.
Okay, I don't want to go on too long,
1:10.
so let me
So you've got another 15.
Okay, well, let me talk for another 5, let's say, and then we will have plenty of time for you to object and make comments. We started out with the question, the Clausewitzian question, right, of what kind of world is it? Well, clearly, it's not the world, the kind of world that the apostles of globalization thought it would be in 1990 or 2000. It's not the flat world of Tom Friedman. Tectonic forces of globalization seem to be generating new mountains and valleys along old stress fractures. I would argue that at least in part the collapse of the state system in the Middle East and the rise of the so-called Islamic State on its ruins is a consequence of the rage generated by the sense of loss, at least in part, and dislocation, which is attendant to globalization. It seems to be, and this is a phenomenon that awaits its theorist, sort of Adam Smith for the 21st century. It seems to be the case that as we're forced together into a globalized information grid, we cling all the more stubbornly to the things that make us ourselves. During this last presidential campaign, a particularly skillful demagogue exploited these fears, promised to reverse the process. You think about it, it's remarkable how much of that campaign took place in sort of the ether of cyberspace, right? Endless arguments about emails and tweets, Russian interference in cyberspace, favoring one candidate over the other, paid internet trolls peddling lies. All of it created an aura of postmodern distance in which the truth was a casualty. And in such a climate, the biggest of lies gave a residue of doubt, undermining the very basis of truth and democracy. I don't pretend to be able to see clearly into the world of the 21st century, which will be created by these restless forces. I do know that it's likely to present unprecedented new challenges to American security, and that without American leadership, a world subject to the pressures of globalization will not order itself. The technical, let me just make one last point and then turn over the floor, if you will. The technical name for the grand strategy we have followed since really the Second World War is offshore balancing, right? So the notion is you create an alliance of states, and you shore it up with military force if necessary. But it's a sort of self-ordering situation in which, for example, in Asia, if China is acting up and threatening its neighbors, a coalition of states, Vietnam, Thailand, Korea, and Japan, emerges as a sort of a natural consequence of that Chinese pressure. And the United States can, by providing military support to that coalition, engineer a balance which prevents it from getting out of hand. Same in Europe. Russia is threatening Ukraine. NATO is there to sort of hold the line and hold the ring. And it's been a successful grand strategy most of the time. The danger today is that we seem to be about to abandon it, and rush into something quite different. I don't want to sound like a Cassandra, but it is true that Cassandra was right in the end, although she became tiresome in predicting the fall of Troy. I don't think it's good news necessarily that our president has discovered the delights of launching cruise missiles while eating chocolate cake. I think he may want to do that again at some point. It seemed to work out well for him. And frankly, although there's a coalition of what's been called an axis of adults around him, and Secretary of Defense Mattis, perhaps Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State Tillerson, certainly H.R. McMaster at the White House, his proclivities in this matter still leave me with considerable disquiet. So on that note, let me leave it at that and open the floor to your questions and comments. About globalization, it's discontent. Yes, sir.
I was, a long time ago when I was in my undergraduate, one of the themes discussed in history was periods of expansionism and isolationism. And currently, I got the impression that right now America seems to be more isolationist, like we want to appear stronger, more focused inward. My question is, do you believe that this increased aggression in this war is more of an expansionist view, like with the globalization efforts, or more inward focused, I suppose? Because it seems to me that a lot of Trump supporters I speak to, like, we want to appear strong, is a term that you and we are interacting with a lot more other countries, a lot more, and
So
so.
we've been in a state of war for 15 years.
Yeah.
We remain in a state of war. It's unprecedented in our history. The war is based on something called authorization to use military force, which was adopted by the Congress a week or so after 9/11. I forgot exactly when. And it's the basis on which we're conducting all of these operations all over the world. It's the basis, for heaven's sakes, on which we're supporting Saudi Arabia in a combat against some folks who are called Houthi rebels, with whom Saudi Arabia takes a dim view because they're sort of aligned with Iran and they're sort of Shia, although a different sort of Shia than the Iranian ones. That's not an isolationist posture, right? That would horrify an isolationist. Indeed, it horrifies many folks in the Republican Party who are in that wing, Rand Paul, for example. So we're not in an isolationist phase exactly. We are in a militaristic phase, I think, of the institutions that we've got, I mean, our engagement in Iraq and Afghanistan, which continues, our efforts to combat extremism in the ISIL, to combat ISIL, which continue, are all fundamentally military objects. And the military, Jim Mattis, if he were here, would be the first guy to say, that's not the answer. It's not the answer. We need a political, there needs to be a political track, a political solution, a political strategy to go along with that military, those military activities, those military attacks. And we don't have that in most cases. So we've got one strand of an effective international policy, which is use of military force, but it isn't allied with any sort of political strategy that can make sense of it. Yes, ma'am.
We're at the point where, like, no one's really going to win the war anymore. And it's no matter what, we try to set up democratic governments that they're going to fall, or it's whoever we put in place is going to be overthrown. So what do you suppose is the best kind of route to get out of this predicament that we put ourselves in?
Which wars are you talking about? How do I steer it?
I know there's so many of them now.
There are.
Yeah. Well, I guess they're all like slightly different, but mainly, like, since you mentioned Iraq and Afghanistan, especially since we started upping the biggest non-nuclear bomb baseball tunnels, like, what do you suppose is going to come, like, in the future?
Well, I mean, Professor Norby is the expert on Afghanistan, but I've always thought that the end of it would have to be a negotiation of some sort between the Taliban and some sort of a government supported by the United States. That would be an unsatisfactory end. But we don't seem to be very close to that. The late Dick Holbrooke was working very hard to permit that. He got nowhere in the Obama administration. And if Dick Holbrooke were here today, he certainly would get nowhere in the Trump administration. So we're moving farther away from a sensible political strategy to end the war in Afghanistan, which isn't to say that that would be easy. With regard to Islamic extremism, well, in his inaugural address, the president said that he was going to eradicate it. Well, it's an idea. Islamic extremism is an idea. You can't eradicate an idea. You can't kill everybody who thinks that way. So that again, that open-ended commitment to eradicating Islamic extremism everywhere we're head around the world is a formula for endless war. And is that the society that we want to have? we're able to fight these wars because we have this extraordinary professional military force, of which we've got a couple of, two, I don't see the other, representatives here today. And so the rest of us can kind of wait it out and watch. But it's not a formula. It's not a formula for success. And over time, it sort of has a corrosive effect, I think, on our democratic institutions. Yes.
You referred to the State Department as an empty shell, and
Yeah.
I think we're all aware that there are a number of
Yeah.
positions that haven't been filled there. Certainly, lots of ambassadorships that haven't been.
No positions of.
Do you think this is incompetence, or is it an intentional plan to centralize additional power in the White House?
Power would, I don't know, that's a very good question, and I think it's a little of both. I think that, the Steve Bannons of the administration would like to sort of destroy the administrative state, right? So they don't want to fill any of these positions, and I think that the president has a good deal of sort of emotional sympathy with the idea that you don't need an assistant secretary for this and an assistant secretary for that. The State Department was extremely top-heavy. A lot of positions there were filled because they went to campaign supporters, senior positions. So you had an enormous number of special envoys for this and special envoys for that. There's no harm in getting rid of some of that. Tillerson appears to be approaching its structure from the perspective of a highly capable CEO who understands what management ought to, look like. And there's a lot of good in that. However, he was unable to, Elliott Abrams, who was, we wanted as his deputy, was vetoed by the White House staff. Elliott's not my cup of tea, but he's an able man. So he's got nobody home. No professional staff to advise him whatsoever. So you get things like, where's that carrier battle group going? I don't know. Is it going to Australia or is it going to Korea? And you look like fools. And we're going to see more of that unless these positions get filled, both at the Pentagon and at the State Department. So I think it's partly they don't care, partly they don't have much of a bench in terms of capable Republicans who can step up, who have much of a bench of people who weren't severely critical of Trump. And the problem with Abrams, as you know, was when he was proposed as deputy to Tillerson, somebody, probably Steve Bannon, went to Trump and said, look what this guy said about you during the campaign, which was the end of Abrams' appointment as deputy secretary. So, I don't think there's a sensible Republican foreign policy, experienced foreign policy hand who didn't say terrible things about Donald Trump during the campaign. And if you can't hire any of those, you've got a problem filling positions. But it can't go on this way. Professor Doyle.
Larry said, rightly so, that there is no articulated legal basis for the 59 tomahawks.
Right.
And I wonder who's writing these legal memos to justify these actions. Under Obama, it was Harold Coe on drones.
Yeah.
For God's sakes, even President Bush had John Yoo writing infamous torture memos, right, for waterboarding.
Yeah.
But at least those executives were going to lawyers to have the legal articulation of the action that they. Is that happening?
I don't think it's happening at all. I don't think it's happening at all. I don't think they care. The Obama administration's sort of careful legal justification for the use of force overseas, drawn up in December, 60 pages of footnotes. I'm sure there's nobody in the Trump administration who sees the slightest need to look at it. To the chemical weapons, there is a chemical weapons treaty, but nobody went to the UN. There was no UN authorization. The AU, or the authorization to use military force, covers Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. The Syrian government is actually fighting Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, so it can't be construed to cover an attack on the Syrian government, the Syrian air base. I don't think this. I think this is an administration that believes in force, the use of force, without much legal constraint, without any legal constraints, really. Believes that acting in the interest of the United States overseas is enough. to justify what it considers to be the United States citizens. And that's fine, I guess. Most presidents have taken that view sooner or later, but at some point, the Congress, we still live in a republic, right? And the Congress makes laws. The Congress has sort of abandoned its fundamental responsibility to rule on the use of force overseas by the administration. Obama tried a bunch of times, as you know, to amend the authorization to use military force to make it more applicable to the current situation. Couldn't get anywhere with the Congress. Yes?
You mentioned the role of the State Department in the diplomatic efforts and the linear kind of state-to-state discussions.
Yeah.
With the rise of the non-state actors, ISIS and various offshoots of
Yes.
Al-Qaeda,
Yes.
does that weaken or increase the need for non-linear, traditional State Department type action?
I used to do counterterrorism with the State Department.
Sure.
Right, I did that for a couple of years. One of the things about terrorists is they have to live somewhere. So if they live in a place that is a failed state or a territory that's not controlled by a government, that's one thing. But they have to live somewhere. And every bit of the world's territory is composed of nation states. So if a nation state can't control its own territory and allows attacks on the United States from that territory, as was the case in Afghanistan before 9/11, it becomes a legitimate target for the United States. But it can be, all that can be constrained by the states that border it. In the case of Afghanistan, that hasn't worked out very well in Pakistan, but that's still where we need to go. So the nation-state framework is still the fundamental framework that is the organizing principle for our world. That was kind of the point I wanted to make. And when it fails, military force is a reasonable option in self-defense. But it's still there. North Korea. Take North Korea, right? So China's the big power right next door. And rightly, the Trump administration is focusing on trying to get Chinese cooperation in controlling the North Korean nuclear program, which if left unchecked, is going to result in a state that has nuclear weapons and the ability to deliver them in U.S. and American terms. It's a really big problem. But the remedy for it then is the nation-state system. It's China. If that fails, you do have the option of military force if threatened.
Quick concluding question.
Yes, sir.
What would you tell the audience and the folks in front of you about a Foreign Service career?
Anybody interested in the Foreign Service career diplomacy? Oh, good, some hands. That's great. Have I discouraged you about it? I guess I would say that representing the United States is an honorable profession overseas. Every state, even the United States, needs a diplomatic service. This too shall pass. This too will pass, right? We'll come back to that. We'll come back to the need for a sensible diplomatic service, I think, at some point. If my daughter, I have two of them, were to ask me whether or not it's a good idea to join the Foreign Service right now, tomorrow, I might have some hesitation. But I do think that it's a career that ought to be open to the talents, best people we have, and there'll always be a need for people who are willing to go and often sacrifice to their families and personal pleasures and the rest of it, and serve in funky places in difficult circumstances and often dangerous ones. So, if anybody's interested, I would encourage them to pursue that. Maybe wait a year or so.
On that note, Ambassador Pope, thank you.